Cool. While Malcolm's getting a beer, want to hammer through an agenda? Are we waiting on anybody? Did Alex join
Hey, can you
us?
guys hear me?
Yeah,
We
we can
got
hear you.
Alex.
Awesome.
So my average brew is brewed already, Will, and it tastes pretty darn good. Um, I think ordinary bitter is a highly underrated style, in my opinion, and I'm very happy to have one on tap. So cool. So this is the September meeting. Our speaker Malcolm apparently is window blinds, but that's all good. Apparently he's gonna go grab a beer. I'm gonna mute all right now. So those of you that need to talk in a minute, we'll get to make fun of Malcolm because he won't hear this. Malcolm, I put you on everyone on mute for a second, just so we could get through here and be our kind selves, going back and forth. Uh, but yeah, thanks for everyone who came out last month. It was great hanging out with Chip Walton. He's a cool guy. If you guys have anyone else that you want to see, so far it's like we're happy. If you know people that are awesome, let us know, and if you can get us the hookup on some great speakers. Malcolm was gracious enough to grace with their presence today, but if you want to see somebody to come hang out and chat with us or ask questions, present something, let us know. Alex will throw up the emails, or Hava or somebody will at the brew club, Haven at the brew club, um, Havo at the brew club, Alex, who did I miss? But yeah, email one of us and we're open to all these ideas. So like I normally plug every meeting, the brew club has an experiment series that we partner with Brülosophy.com for. If you get an article published, you will be voted on a fan favorite article and get put in a drawing for a Delta Firm tank. So it's pretty awesome that you get the opportunity to compete against just 6 other articles, I think, to get a stainless steel fermenter. So how awesome is that? We'll announce the winners somewhere around the December time frame. Um, Again, for details on that, email me or Alex, and we're happy to hook you up. Last week was the Powerade versus water experiment in a Belgian wit, I believe. And I think that actually got the most clicks on the Brülosophy.com website uh, for the year. So, uh, so love it or hate it or just don't understand it. That's it. Next month we have Julia Hertz. Some of you might know her as the executive director of the American Homebrewer Association. She has at least a couple of decades of experience in the brewing industry, including prior roles at the Brewer Association, award-winning homebrewer, BJCP judge, advanced cicerone, beer educator, and then she's got a couple books: Beer Pairing, The Essential Guide, and then craftbeer.com's Beer and Food. And then Haven's got some announcements to make as well. Sorry I didn't put yours together, but you can skip
Yep.
over Alex and do yours together.
Oh yeah. Okay. Uh, Average brews. So we are in the last month of quarter 3, which is kind of crazy to think about. That we're already thinking about quarter 4, but we still have the big one, the podcast coming up for the ordinary bitter. So I think most of you guys, if you've brewed it, you put your name on the post, throwing your name in the hat to get drawn. We haven't had as many people post this time as of yet, so we may just kind of throw we've still had a pretty good amount. I think in the past we've had like pushing 40, and I think we're right around 23. Um, so I think we might just throw everyone in there and just pick from the whole pool again. So if you've won in the past, we might just include you in and pick up from everyone. So that'll happen. It's the third. I don't know, maybe next week or something. We'll do some drawings. We'll get those names selected, and then we will kind of coordinate with Marshall to make sure that we can ship closer to when he's actually going to record, so we don't have another oxidation incident as we did last time. But I think that was a yeast issue, so we'll chalk it up to that. Uh, Moving on quick, we've been looking for more ways to get the club together and just have fun and talk about things that maybe aren't beer. So Thursday night we drafted for the TBC fantasy football. So I know Alex will. I think Jason, you're in that. So we have a fantasy football league that we're doing this year. Just for fun, just something outside of beer, just to get some of us together. And one of our other ideas is Discord trivia night. So we are going to there's a cool
through whatever time.
Oh shoot. Hey, Will, you want to mute everyone again? Oh no, he made it. Okay, we're good. So there's a cool little bot on Discord that we can use to do some trivia. Just fun. It's quick. It's like 30 seconds a question. We're doing different topics. I have a couple beer related quizzes made up. We have some that are not beer related, and they're just fun. So we'll get together and do that on Discord. I'll drop the Discord link in the chat here a little later, so you can sign up. And then Alex beat me to it. Look at that. So join in, come on over. It'll be a lot of fun. Hopefully in the future, if it catches on and we're having fun with it, we can have some little prizes and stuff for people who win. But just another thing to get together outside these meetings and have 20 or 30 minutes of fun on a weeknight or something like that. So yeah, if you have any suggestions for that, or if you're interested or think it's really stupid, let me know. Alex, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Haven. So yeah, probably should have written something in advance, but yeah, and a couple weeks from now, we're going to make an official announcement finally for paid membership officially for 2023. And yeah, I think we can all agree that Haven's been extremely generous, taking his own time and money shipping out average brew yeast.
No, it's like
but I think we can all agree, maybe he shouldn't at least have to pay for it. So I think it'd be awesome if, one of the first things we tackled with paid dues was covering shipping out the Lallemand and Imperial yeast. And then naturally, the second thing that we're excited to do with dues is start having our meetings on Microsoft Teams, just to have all the benefits that has, of course. But I think a lot of people have been asking about making sure that meetings are recorded and viewable afterwards. And I think Microsoft Teams should make it really easy for us to record meetings in high quality video and post them later. And so those are kind of the two first things we want to tackle with paid membership. But after that, I think we're going to keep it pretty open and kind of ask paid members what they want to do with dues. For example, do we want to prioritize trivia night or things like that? So yeah, so look for a link probably about 10 days from now about paid membership. If you sign up now, the paid membership benefits will also cover the remainder of 2022. So yeah, pass it back to Will.
All right, tonight I am super stoked. We have Malcolm from an Emiritus Brülosophy contributor, whatever that big fancy word means. I believe he's a pro brewer, BJCP judge. What other credentials you got there, Malcolm? Make sure to unmute yourself.
I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm a advanced cicerone, and I think I've got sensory training. I used to run a sensory lab and a quality lab at Fatheads. I don't know, a lot of stuff. I mean, beer's been in my life in some way or another since the late 90s. So you can probably ask me a lot of questions, and if I can't find the answer, if I don't have the answer, I can lead us to where to find it later. I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of my time researching this nerdy shit, and I have a lot of friends in the industry who can find us the answers. So I like these kind of things. I'm still a home brewer at heart. I like talking with home brewers. I like trying to balance the technical with fun and nerdy, kind of live in that zone. So let's have some fun. Let's ask some questions. It doesn't have to be serious. It can be stupid. It can be goofy. It can be personal. So.
Well, dude, what have you been up to since? I mean, there was a while in COVID. We knew you were kind of in limbo.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you fell off the Brülosophy radar. So what's your journey been like, man? A lot of us listen to the podcast, and whether we had a personal relationship with it or not, like I know I care about what's going on with you. So what's up, man?
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, appreciate that. So right on COVID, I was at Fatheads. So I left Miller Coors, went to Fatheads, and because it was closer to home, and I had a job offer down in Georgia to run a place down there, but that was going to be more production manager, brand manager. And then the Fatheads offering, I had become, acquaintances with a couple people at Fatheads, most importantly, Matt Cole, the brewmaster, through homebrew stuff, through like competitions. And I think I did a collab with them once or twice. And anyways, I parlayed that relationship into a job offer, which was bringing me close to home. So Cleveland's only 2 hours from Pittsburgh. Well, COVID hit, and Fatheads had just done a large expansion, which is one of the reasons why I was there. They had created the quality role for me. So I was in charge of yeast propagation, sensory, some innovation, some recipe development, with the oversight of the team, of course. And that went two ways, right? And I oversaw the team oversaw me. It was a collaborative effort. But COVID hit, and they were so big, almost 70% of the business was distribution. Well, when stadiums go away, concerts go away, restaurants go away, money goes away. And I was new, and they laid me off at first. They laid off a lot of people, and they did some callbacks, and they called me back for a role that just didn't fit me and my family's life. I had left the nuke industry to get away from shift work, and they asked me to come back as like a swing guy, hey, do some lab work, do some cellar work, do some brew work, because I was able to do all those roles. So I was like, yo, thanks for throwing me a lifeline, but that's not the life I want right now. So someone posted on Facebook, an old brewing acquaintance from Pittsburgh, which is where my wife is from, and said, hey, do you want to come lead the team here? I'm doing an expansion. So that seemed to work, and so I got to lead a team. I'm leading a team now at Hop Farm. We doubled the capacity there, which wasn't a big bite because they were so small, but we doubled the capacity. I think we really improved the Instagram, the social media, the labels, the brand positioning in the market. We've really, really come a long way. And that was my role. My role was to come and make the organization a little more mature. So teaching the sales force how to talk beer, teaching the front of house people how to talk beer, doing continuous tasting, saying, what are we tasting here? Is this better or worse than the last version? Is it different? How do you think it's different? What was the process involved? A lot of it's kind of process stuff that's kind of boring to talk about for the average person, but ops people and managerial people get excited about SOPs and rigorous processes and saving money by propping your own yeast and doing cell counts and taking ATP readings for sanitization and all that kind of stuff. Trying to make the organization a little more mature, a little more operating like a larger brewery, because that's the space you want to get to,
So somebody wants to know what you're drinking.
So a buddy of mine, this is actually one of the first collabs I ever did, so I thought this was fortuitous. Lavery Brewing up in Erie. So Lavery, owned by Jason and Nikki Lavery, they were really, really cool. Back when I was home brewing, first came from Hawaii out of the Navy, they were just kind of reaching out to homebrewers and stuff on like Three Rivers Alliance of Serious Homebrewers. That's Trash, and Trube, which is Three Rivers Underground Brewers. So they reached out and said, hey, anyone interested in doing some batches, whatever, we host local homebrewers. It's kind of fun. So we started chatting. This is probably like 2004 or 5. And he's like, yeah, man, you should just come up. You should be surprised. He said, you'd be surprised. Almost no one takes us up on the offer. I was like, fuck it. Loaded up some homebrews that we could share and drove up to Erie, an hour and a half away. And we brewed. This beer used to be called Leopold Or. It's probably backwards for you guys. Does it flip it for you guys? I don't know. Is it backwards?
It flips it.
It flips it. So it says Gold Leopard.
Gold Leopard. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So Gold Leopard.
Yeah.
Well, it used to be called Leopold Or, which is because Lavery's Irish and I'm English. So we like to tease each other. He calls me English. I call him Irish. Gold Leopard was one of their first beers they brewed large scale, and it was a Brettanomyces bottle conditioned saison, and it won GIBF gold, and it hasn't won since. So I always tease Jason. I say, well, that was the batch we brewed together. But I thought it was kind of funny when we were talking about having this podcast, and I thought this was appropriate to open because of the homebrew roots. This is my first collab, pro-am beer and it won a GABF Gold. So it's a good beer.
That's badass. I think Will Aller wants to know, describe more Georgia, the place where you working at. Was that the schoolhouse, or where were you working in Georgia?
Oh, so schoolhouse. Those friends of mine, those guys owned a homebrew shop when I was down there, and they were in planning for a brewery. I was attached to Miller Coors when I was in Georgia, so most of my time was spent with the sales force, marketing team, but also some interaction with Terrapin Brewing. They were really cool, especially during the transition. I was trying to improve my knowledge about the operations on the big brewery side, and they were very cool about like letting me hang out and ask questions and poke around. And I helped them too because my role was education innovation. So talking with their sales team, doing a lot of work with in the market, talking with their brew lab down by the stadium. Those brewers are super on top of their game. They're very sharp brewers, so they didn't need someone to come in and like fix it. They didn't need any of that, but it was more about how to speak to the market, how to use our selling terms in a way to leverage education and get them to buy into the fact that we're beer people. Especially when Terrapin was bought by Miller Coors, some people do the big beer no thank you thing, but when you can bring a team in that shows that they're really passionate about beer, when you're competing against local small breweries, I think it kind of added a little bit of gravitas, a little bit of authenticity, especially because the roots of Terrapin, they were small time brewers and they were home brewers, and it seemed a shame that their coolness goes away a little bit when you're acquired by a big brewery, which is part of the deal. But they were still good people. Some of the best people I've still met in the industry. They like to party. They're out there in Athens and they like to have a good time. They have their barbecues and events and their anniversary parties. And if you're ever in Georgia, I would go to Terrapin. It's pretty awesome.
Did the schoolhouse offer you any kind of brewery job? That was Will's follow-up.
No, not directly. Tom was really cool when I was there, and he asked for help, not like because he needed it. Once again, he was a very sharp individual, but just like we became quick friends. And he said, yeah, when I open up, I'd really like to, collab with you and do some stuff with you. But Tom and Justin were on top of the brewing. They knew what they were doing. They had it under control. They didn't need me. We just liked hanging out with each other. So it was more like hey, come hang out, brew some batches and do some stuff. But then when I got the job offer at Fatheads, I had to kind of leave real quick. And they were, neck deep in the process of transferring over to that spot that they're at now. So, no formal job offer, just let's continue to hang out and be cool because they're cool dudes,
So Brent asked a very poignant question about any tips on a job in the brewing or home brewing world that can make enough money to support a family, and are they just unicorns that don't exist?
They're not unicorns. What happens is you have to have something that separates you out, and that could be your perspective, it could be your experience, your background. So for me, I wasn't a multi-year experienced brewmaster somewhere, right? I was a home brewer who worked for a big beer company. Not as sexy to some people. So you have to bring something. And to me, it's usually education. Usually I can bring in some beers and like it's easier. It's easier if in your hometown, if you're pretty well known for brewing. So in Pittsburgh and Cleveland, Erie and surrounding, because I had done a lot of competitions, I had done some classes, I had gone to breweries and consulted on water chemistry. I had consulted on recipe creation. I made a lot of sour and funky beers. And back in the early 2000s, not a lot of people were doing it certainly well. So I was able to bring that to the table. Like, oh yeah, I'll curate your barrel program, or I'll train your brewers on how to do blending. And then because of my background in the nuke industry, that gives you some nerdy credence, right? It gives you a little bit of gravitas there because they believe that you're a nerd and they believe that process control. You can speak the scientific language. But to me, to me, the number one thing is if you're trying to break in, it's show that you've done some background work. So I get a lot of people who apply and like maybe they've cellared somewhere or done on a packaging run somewhere, packaging line somewhere, or they're home brewers, but they're not particularly well educated. Home brewers are packaging line people. It's like, yeah, you have experience. I believe that you cannot kill yourself in a brewery environment, but what have you been reading? What do you listen to? Have you gone taking classes? Are you, a Cicerone or a BJCP judge? Tell me that you recently read How to Brew, and then let me ask you some questions about that. But a lot of these people just show up and go, "I'm eager. I'm ready to work." I'm like, okay, show me something. Show me something that you did. And the last person I hired, she went out and got an internship working from packaging on the way up over a course of several months. So that was like I went and got it, right? And she's not making enough money, in my opinion, but she's making above average in the area, for the brewing position. In order to be making decent money to earn a living, I think you need to go to a place that's probably making over 1,000 barrels a year, preferably 3 to 5. You probably need to be in charge of 1 or 2 locations. So usually a brew house and a tap room. And you have to make sense. You have to show that you making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year is worth it, because some clown's willing to come in, undervalue the workforce, work for 45, 50, which I don't know how you live on that. But people do it because they like the job so much. They want to enter the brewing industry. So they're willing to work for, $18 an hour, and to me, we're devaluing our industry. And a lot of times owners and investors, they see somebody who worked at, I'm not sure where all you guys are from, but let's just say you're from Atlanta, right? So you're from Atlanta, or here in Pittsburgh, here in Pittsburgh, you worked at Penn Brewery. So Penn Brewery is an established brand. It's been around for a while. You say, yeah, I worked at Penn Brewery for 5 years. They go, oh my God, he's got experience. I'm going to hire this guy. He only wants $45,000 a year. Meanwhile, one of you who might have a job somewhere, that where you make decent money, hopefully, and you're like, oh yeah, you go in and you say, well, I can't do this for less than 65, 70. They're going to look at you and be like, well, why should I go with Bob when, this guy over here has been working for 5 years at Penn Brewery? That's a resume, but they don't know that he can't make good beer. It's really, really tough. We're in a weird spot in this industry where a lot of people who are in charge of payroll and have the pocket string or the purse string control, they don't value brewers. They don't value us. They don't value seller persons. And it usually, in my opinion, shows up in the quality of the beer. But guess what? Right now, you go to a tap room or a brew place that's popular, they're probably baller at marketing, great with their Instagram and their Facebook. Their labels look awesome, and the beer is mediocre, and the crowd doesn't care. So why would they pay you $65,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year to make beer that's a 9 or a 10 when a beer that's a 6 does just as well? The consumer is just not
marketing. Yeah, marketing is a hell of a thing, and I get sucked into the Instagram too, because you start seeing all these cool beer releases. You're like, well, why the hell not do I want to not go there and try that thing? So
it works. And humans, we're predictable creatures and very reliable, very predictable. And, pretty pictures of foam coming out of a glass and an attractive person, be it male or female, get the arm sleeve and you have a nice, pint of beer and it looks nice and they have some fruit around it. If it's a fruited sour, people are like, I want to go there, and the average person, buys McDonald's. So, to them, a beer that's non-poisonous, like a 6 or a 7, just to use a scale out of 10, they're okay with that because they're there for the vibe. They're there for the crowd. They're there for the marketing, and making a bomb ass freaking ESB, they give 2 shits about that. They get, we're talking about the masses, we're 5% might be gracious, we're 2% of the market,
I agree, and I think I don't know, definitely more needs to be done to get fewer hazies on tap, in my opinion. But that's just me.
I make them all day. You know,
Cool.
I make them all day.
I'm sure you do. They sell like crazy.
Yep, it's fruited sours too. You know, it's like you ever see Glengarry and Ross? You guys know
Right.
familiar with them? Who's the gentleman up here in the blue shirt nodding? I didn't
Will.
hear you. You're muted.
That's
You're
Will.
muted.
He's
Will.
muted.
Will?
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
hey, what's up, man?
What's up?
You in sales or anything like that? Marketing?
I've done some sales. Yes.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
So watching Glengarry and Ross is like a rite of passage for sales. But you know, they always be cleaning. You know, always be closing. So in the brewery, it's you should always be brewing a hazy. You should always be brewing a fruited sour. So if you have a fruited sour and a hazy in the tank, then you're allowed to brew another beer. If you don't have a hazy in the tank or a fruited sour in the tank, you're fucking up. You know, you're screwing yourself or the owner, the investors. You should always be brewing a fruited sour and a hazy. If that's your thing. There's some breweries that refuse to do them, but that's just the way it is. You know, I juggle tank space with hazies all the time. I go, oh, I just brewed a 7.5% hazy. I should probably brew like a low 6% hazy. Oh, I just brewed a 6% hazy. I should probably do an 8% hazy. So I'm always brewing a hazy IPA or hazy pale ale, and I'm always trying to fit in a lager or an old world style. Like we just did a smoked salt lime goza. You know, it's alderwood smoke. You know, so that's going to be for the culinary nerds, right? That's a small segment. Most people don't give a fuck that you have alderwood smoked salt in that goza. To them, the average person drinks sea squinch from Dogfish Head. So now you're doing a trick. You're bringing this nuanced, like really nice home smoked salt into this equation, and people are just like, "Oh, it tastes like a campfire, isn't that neat?" You know. So whatever. You know, that's the world we live in.
Well, and so I'm a big fan of Rauk beer, and I love that style. And somebody posed a question. It was like I think it was a BYO or something article, and they're like, "Dude, we live in the world of barbecue, bacon,
Yeah.
and smoked everything, and we can't sell a effing smoked beer to anybody."
Yeah. So
It's crazy to me.
we just did Muza, which is Polish for muse. We did a Grodzicki, aka Grotzer, and we used locally smoked malt. So there's a maltster about an hour and a half north of us called CNC, Custom and Craft Malting, whatever. Awesome people. And I said, hey, I want to make a Grotzer. Can you smoke some wheat for us? And I think he heard it differently. He's like, yeah, we're smoking weed right now, man. But I was like, no, wheat. I need some wheat malt that's smoked. So he smoked it, and it's like 30%, locally sourced smoked wheat. So it's really intense. So if you take a bag of like a Vireman oak smoked and smell it, I took this stuff that they gave me, which was only smoked a couple days, like a day or two ago. It was so strong. So I had to use less of it. But it sold pretty good, man.
So, but isn't that part of the process? Like I know a lot of, at least the maltster I know of here in Texas, they cold smoke it. Whereas like Wireman, they're kilning with like fire, right? Like I think it's a different process.
I don't know what Vireman's process is. So if you're a rock beer fan, maybe you can speak more intelligently on that. What I do know is it could be processed like you're saying, but it could also be just the fact that they do a huge batch. Some of it sits in a silo and then a car and then a bagging facility. So I don't get it 2 days after smoking,
Right.
But it could also be that process. I know CNC cold smokes, but it's not cold like cheese. It's cold like 110 degrees, 120 degrees. So they bring over the smoke into a cold room, a vessel they have with grates, and I think they do spray it so it has a little bit of moisture, so it helps pick up the smoke. But I think the beer is pretty good. We teamed with This Week in Rock Beer. Are you on that? Are you on that group?
Oh, I love This Week in Rock Beer. John Hall's great.
Yeah, exactly. So John Hall and then we teamed up with them and did that Muza. So that was a release for Homebrew Con. And then because they were in town This Week in Rock Beer, we had a smoked Doppelbock from East End And then my buddies at 11th hour, they did a smoked Hellas. So we had 3 smoked beers on tap, which is like unheard of, you know. But,
No, John Hall's great, and he's super cool. Like if you're into Rauk beer, you can email John Hall and he'll respond to you within like a day. It's awesome.
yeah.
So got some hazy questions that kind of cropped up.
Mhm.
Hayden wants to know kind of your percentage of hazies to fruited sours make up your total beer sales. Someone else has questions about thiolized yeasts in
Yep.
hazies.
Yeah. So percentage, I bet you hazies and sour combined is like 50 to 60% of our sales. Hazies is almost usually 2 to 1. So if we have, and you start to cannibalize, right? Because if you have 3 hazies on, do you count that as hazy? Yes, you do, right? So if we had 3 hazies on, that would probably make up like, 30%, 40% of the sales. And then the fruited sours would be like 20%. And then everything else switches out. We have a light lager we do that's consistently like number 3. So no matter what else is on the menu, the light lager is number 3 usually. And then funny enough, right now we have a mild on, and that's usually like number 3 or 4. But everything else kind of switches around. So if we like for Oktoberfest next week and the week afterwards, that O-Fest beer will probably be number 1 for 2 weeks, But I wouldn't be surprised if it's still number 2 behind a hazy, which is a shame. But that's the world,
So kind of piggybacking on that. So Jonah, he says he lives in Hazy Central because he lives up in Maine.
Yeah, sure.
But he's saying that a lot of the long-time hazy breweries are starting to make a lot of other styles, and so there's kind of an interest shift in some of those areas. Are y'all noticing that as well, or is it not so much?
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of West Coast right now, and matter of fact, today's Saturday. Friday, we have a party called Socks and Sandals, and it's going to be like kind of like a beach rock band and a DJ afterwards. Everyone's encouraged to wear sandals and socks, and just kind of do like the West Coast vibey thing. And what we did is we invited a bunch of local breweries who are making clear beer. So if you're doing a clear West Coast IPA or a clear APA, you are invited, and it's just a tap takeover. I think we're doing like free tattoos and shit for a couple hours, but it is a celebration of clear beer, old school West Coast, like Sierra Nevada type, Firestone Walker or Lagunitas and Stone, those types, Dale's Pale Ale, those type of older school IPAs. And right now in the market, like in tap room, hazies still rule for sure. But in the market, so like your pub houses, I don't know, depending on where you guys are, but you probably have like a couple of chains that aren't chains like Applebee's, but they're chains like there's 3 or 4 of them in your area. And one of those around here is Mad Mex. So Mad Mex, and we have another place called Industry Public House, and they have a couple locations. They almost always order more West Coast IPA than hazies because their crowd is older. Their crowd is eating food. Well, hazies don't, in my opinion, don't do well with food. They're too sweet. They're too full on your palate. They're like a bomb of hops in your mouth. So it just obliterates your palate. West Coasts, yeah, they, especially old school ones, we had like that IBU race for a while with like palate wrecker and all that stuff. But a well-balanced West Coast is great for food, right? It's dry, it's well attenuated. It has a firm bitterness, but that drops off. And you have a lot of gypsum, which adds to dryness. So you drink a West Coast IPA if you're eating something fatty, like a hamburger or whatever, like Industry Public House and Mad Mex sells a lot of Latin fusion stuff. So it's greasy, full of flavored stuff. You wash it back with an IPA, it scrubs it off your palate. And then you want another bite of your hamburger. That's not the case with most hazies. Most hazies are not very bitter. Most hazies are just so thick and creamy and have so much flavor going on. You have a whole glass, a 16-ounce glass of a 7-8% hazy. You often don't want to eat much, so that's not great for these food places.
You get palate fatigue just like 2 drinks in. So
yeah, Yeah, it's palate fatigue. It's clash, very clash. I mean, there's some things you can pair food with hazies, well-made hazies. I am of the opinion it's not as easy, and it's not designed for eating more than just a small light fare. So West Coasts are getting real popular around here, again, which is nice to see. And I agree with you, leading on to the main thing, a lot of places who are making hazies because they sell, and maybe they are hop aficionados, they probably started as homebrewers way back when they were brewing freaking, amber ales and California Common and, cream ale. So they were brewing those things 15 years ago, and they're kind of just getting nostalgic, and they're just like, wow, I'm just going to brew like one or two of these. And I think a lot of the crowd's sitting back almost going like, oh my God, like, well, Jim's a big brewer, and he works at Bissell, or this guy works at, Alchemist, or he came from, name drop all you want, locations. But when they see these high profile brewers making like a Cal Common, they buy into it. It's like instant gravitas, right? You have, the resume is because this person's making it or this brewery's making it. So I think now some of the crowd is accepting those old school beers, Whereas
so one of
before,
those beautiful things I've seen in a while is Dick and I, who Dick Wallace is his name on this thing. We were at a brewery here locally in San Antonio a couple weeks ago, and that brewery was slammed, like couldn't hardly get a seat, and they didn't have a single IPA, hazy or otherwise, on tap. And you're like,
Yeah.
man, this is wild. They had some Belgian, some Old Worlds. It was fantastic. So Scott was asking Alex was asking if there's any like standouts for the non-hazies that are kind of coming forward. And then there were some comments on some craft lager scenes that have been kind of cropping up in different places, and what your feedback might be on that.
standout non-hazy meaning in the market.
Right. Like, what are you seeing selling that's non-hazy that's kind of moving up?
Well, I don't travel as much right now because of my jobs and coaching my kids' soccer, wherever. But locally, I said the West Coast are getting real popular. And, it feels like 2008 again, but Saisons. So people are making Saisons again, but not necessarily calling them Saisons. Pardon me, burp. They're doing more like a mixed firm. So it'll be like a Saison yeast with something else. And they're calling them farmhouse or rustic ales, whatever. And they're often layering in something else. So it's not just a Saison. It's like a Saison with chamomile. It's a Saison with some exotic fruit. It's a Saison with some exotic spice. I see a lot of that happening locally, but by a lot, I might just mean like 2 or 3 breweries, but they're popular breweries. So that's kind of neat to see. We just did a beer called May Queen, which was an allusion to Midsommar, the horror movie. Or it's not really horror as much as it is. Well, I guess maybe it's a horror movie. But so we did a collab with a podcast called Halloween is Forever. So they do a lot of horror movie stuff. Halloween is Forever. And then we also collabed with a local apiary, so a beekeeper. So we used her honey. We used a local tea shop owned by a woman, because keeping with the May Queen theme. So we used her tea. So it has local honey and local tea. And then we used malt from that CNC maltster because he was local. We used some buckwheat and unmalted spelt. So it's truly a farmhouse, truly a rustic beer. And we used Saisonstein from Omega because that stuff is just a beast. It just chews away everything. And then we used a little bit of Kvike, to kind of keep it kind of funky and weird. And that beer sold so fast. It was insane. I mean, we had a lot of people helping, right? Coven, a new brewery, which was female owned. She was part of it. So we had a lot of, motive force behind it. People wanted to support Coven because they were new. People wanted to support the apiary and the tea shop. People wanted, fans of horror were big into the May Queen thing. That beer was gone in 2 weeks. We brewed 20 barrels of it because we're only a 10-barrel brew house. But we were shocked at how fast a Saison went, So we'll see. We'll see if that continues or if it's just a blip.
Are you guys using thiolized yeast? Are y'all exploring the thiolized yeast phenomenon that's going on? What's your kind of viewpoint on that?
I like it. I'm intrigued by it. I've used some of it. I've used Cosmic Punch and one other one. I can't remember the name of the other one, but from Omega. What's weird is that people are using it, I think, wrong. I think they're trying to take advantage of thiolization while doubling down and using exotic punchy hops already. And that's not what it does, right? I'm not saying if you took that beer and ran it through like a gas chromatograph or whatever, you don't have more of those compounds or some different compounds. But if you're going to use thiolized yeast, why are you using Galaxy, Mosaic, Motueka, Rakau, Citra? Because it's just going to get lost in that cacophony of flavors, right? It's just crazy.
Right, because those already have so many unbound thiols. Why are you trying to free bound thiols from things that have unbound thiols galore, right?
Exactly. So if you're Brülosophy people and you listen to my horrible voice years ago, I would often use that analogy about whispering in a church or talking loudly in a church versus a concert, right? I don't go to church, so I assume they're quiet. But basically, if you're having a mild conversation in church, it stick out like a sore thumb, right? It's a quiet hall. Same thing with brewing with thiolized yeast and making in these loud hops. If you have Citra and Galaxy, I don't think a little more of these compounds are going to make a difference. It's certainly not a game changer. I'm not saying it doesn't add nuance, but where those shine is taking a lot of these old world hops, these Sazer type hops, Noble-esque hops, and some old world English hops, and often using them in the mash or first wort hopping, and then using the thiolized yeast, which will take those precursors and get these tropical citrus flavors, right? So it's very neat to me to make a beer with Saz and then get a beer that you would consider to be fruity,
Well, and even Cascade is cheap enough that it's kind of cool to take something that's so grapefruit forward like Cascade and get some of that funky, fruity stuff as well. So,
but it changes it, right? So if you use Cascade is a good example, and I don't remember if Centennial, because Centennial used to be called Super Cascade, but like Cascade's another one they'll tell you about trying to use. So instead of it just being one note grapefruit and pine, I guess that's two notes, but unless other than just being Pac Northwest grapefruit pine, you use Cascade and a thiolized yeast, and you would swear you had used some Azaka. So that's where it shines. That's the neatness. That's the brewing trick. So that to me is the interesting part,
Plus, cost per pound of Cascade versus something like Citra or Galaxy is huge.
Yeah. Right now in the market, spot buying, you can probably get Cascade for $9 a pound. You can get, Galaxy, Australian Galaxy. I don't know. I'm not sure what it is right now, but it had been as high as like 23 up to 26 a pound, which is insane. It usually hovers around 18, 19 a pound. So it's half the cost. If you can layer some of that in, some Cascade and use a thiolized yeast, then I think you're doing something.
That
and for homebrewers, you guys could take a batch and split it. Brew depending on your system, whatever. Brew a 5-gallon batch, get 2-3 gallon carboys, pitch one yeast and one in the other, and taste it side by side. That's fun to me. So that's what I would do.
That quite recently, actually.
Yeah.
Speaking of, you mentioned Brülosophy earlier, a long time ago. I mean, it's been a year or two, I guess. Do you mind describing kind of your experience, kind of maybe like what was one of your coolest experiences with Brülosophy? Maybe what kind of, if you're able to talk about what kind of led you to decide to step away from that whole gig?
Well, I mean, we became friends from the interwebs, and mostly I would be arguing with Marshall in a friendly way, more like a teasing way, about, hey, you should do the experiments like this. Or I used to do experiments my own. This is how I would do them. And instead of rebuffing me, he would say like, oh, okay. so I kind of liked that. He didn't just sit there and say, fuck off, we're doing it our way. He was more like, oh, okay, let's talk about that. And then at one point he was just like, well, you should just join us, stop criticizing and be part of the thing. I'm like, well, why would I be part of the thing when I don't fully agree how you're doing it? But it's educational and fun. I took away great friends. I'm still in contact with several of those people, and Brian Hall especially. So that was the big takeaway. Obviously, early on, especially a couple of years ago, Brülosophy had a pretty quick rise of popularity. It became nothing to being a very popular podcast really quickly. So it'd be a lie to say it wasn't fun to be part of. It was really neat to have your work recognized by people. People come up to you and say, "Oh my God, I recognize your voice," or, "I read your article." That's kind of nice, And I used Brülosophy on my resume to get my Miller Coors job. I would link articles that I've written. I had shown them experiments that I've done. So they kind of take you more seriously. They're like, oh, yeah, you're a home brewer, but you're like doing something. Like you're writing, you're getting published, even if it's on the internet, but you've put work out there for the public to consume. And my job at Miller Coors, they really found that attractive because I had to go in front of crowds and speak. So they wanted to see that I could do original content and talk. Helping them develop their process. I think when I was there, we became more rigid on how to do scientific experimentation. And I was much more pedantic than they were. I mean, several of the people on that crew are super sharp, but they were trying to cater to a certain audience. And I was always pushing us, I think, to be more, pedantic and more rigorous scientifically, and brewing, really doubling down in the brewing nerdism. So I would try to go, 2 or 3 levels deep, and then Marshall would pull me back 1 or 2, trying to say, well, we have to make it more consumable, and we want to make the articles a decent length. And he was really good at editing. He was a really good writer. So, he would really get his hands in there and say, oh, well, let's just change the word. This is too cumbersome to read. It's too technical. Let's make it more consumable. So I think I became a better writer being at Brülosophy just from watching Marshall edit my stuff. It was like flashbacks to college, going through writing classes. Like, nope. So I think I became better for that. Brülosophy really changed my approach to disagreeing with people, because sometimes the data will just, it's like a brilliant, sexy, beautiful theory smashed to bits by facts. You have a theory, you think this matters, and then the average person can't tell. So, I mean, is it the best study? Is it the best data collection process? Is it the best data set, meaning the people who are, no, but it's better than anyone else was doing at the time. And I really liked that. I really liked the fact that we were actually collecting data, and even though we'd get hammered on by some, keyboard warriors about our statistical analysis method, our collection method, like, we didn't flaunt it too much, but we had consulted people who that was their literal job. They were statisticians, and we compromised. We said, okay, this is how we want to do it. They would say, oh, it'd be better if you did it this way. And then we try to find a compromise somewhere in there. But, we didn't just pull it out of our asses. We were consulting people. So those contacts we were making for those couple of years I was with Brülosophy, some of those people I'm still in touch with. There was actually a guy at Miller Coors at Milwaukee who was part of the lab who knew who I was from fucking Brülosophy. So he is running a lab at one of the largest breweries in the world, and he knows who Brülosophy is. That's crazy.
Yeah, and I will attest personally to Marshall's editing skills, because I've done some TBC experiment articles, and the way that he can take your, not that it's wrong, but cobbled together language and just make it like actually pop and super readable, but still stay to the point is it's magical. Just by being around it, you can definitely learn some pointers and some tips there. So that's pretty awesome. So what kind of made you decide to kind of step aside? Were you just getting busy, just getting too wound up in some other things?
Yeah, busyness. it was a bunch of things all at once, and there was no trigger moment, So it was mostly I was busy, especially when I was with Miller, Coors, and Terrapin. I was traveling a lot, and I didn't have a homebrew system for almost a year and a half. I did a couple batches and experiments with Schoolhouse, so that was awesome. Tom was super nice to help me out with that. Because he used to, listen and read Brülosophy. So he was like, yeah, we should do that here. It was really cool. So it helped kick the can down the road. But at that point, I wasn't contributing every month. And it just wasn't realistic, So when I was home, I tried to arrange my schedule because I was kind of in charge of my own schedule with Miller. So I could be home, so I could coach my kids' soccer occasionally. I was always an assistant because I couldn't be there for all the games and all the practices. So I was trying to coach, trying to be a dad, trying to not get divorced, trying to do my job. So there was no more room for Brülosophy unless I did podcasts. So that was the compromise at first. Was I would tell Marshall, I was like, hey, just use me as a tech expert. So I would do like tech editing. They would bounce some stuff off of me, and then I would do some podcasting, interviews and stuff, and that was working for a little while. But with being a part owner of a 412 brewery here in Pittsburgh, where I'm mostly technical advisor, running this project at Hop Farm, potentially starting a third project on my own right now. That's a lot of stuff, So, Marshall and I talked, and actually I still have his recorder, and he's like, hey, you want to send that back to me? And then we were kind of just BSing back and forth. And he's like, do you want to start contributing again? I'm like, well, I can't homebrew like once a month. I was like, but if you want to talk about something I can do, like, some pro brewer insights or, things that extrapolate from homebrewing to large scale. I mean, I'm willing to do that stuff. If you want to just have like a nerd hour once a month and we can put me on. Like right now we're asking a lot of personal questions, a lot of experiment questions, which I'm fine with. But if you guys wanted to host just what's really needle into thiolized compounds, let's talk about precursors. Let's talk about this precursor begets that end product. I'd be willing to do that. I think there's a space there for me there because that is my passion. That is my love, is talking about formation of chemical compounds that beget yumminess. That's what I like,
Are you still competing at all? Are you or judging, or is that kind of?
Yeah, I judge homebrew stuff locally. I hope to continue that. I think it keeps you sharp. I just judged at Homebrew Gone because it was in Pittsburgh. I judged brewers in Pennsylvania had a big, cool, like whole state competition, which was really awesome. So Brewers in Pennsylvania is a Facebook group, but it's like a promotional group. And they wanted to invite a bunch of home brewers in different locations. And the competition was held at different breweries throughout the state. And then the 3 top places at each location will come together and compete. So I judged that to help with that because that was like something that was near and dear to my heart. I always wished there was a like best of Pennsylvania thing when I was homebrewing. It just didn't exist. I'm going to judge at GABF. So yeah, I'll continue doing that. I really think, in my experience, the best brewers judge, at least for a little while,
I like this question, and then I'll get to Will's question in a second because it's sillier. But what's your favorite swill beer?
Well, swill. Well, come on. So I think I know what you're saying. If you're talking about like American adjunct lagers or cheap dad beers, I'm a Hams guy. I've been unabashed about my love of Hams. Hams is a bit sweet, but I like Hams a lot. Banquet, Coors Banquet, also sweet. If you like isoamyl acetate, if you're a banana fan, drink some Coors Banquet and tell me there's not banana in that. It tastes like Bananas Foster. It's like caramel and bananas. Right now, I drink some Iron City, which is a local Pittsburgh beer. Yeah, I saw that face. I think it's better now than it was a couple years ago. I like Iron City Light, actually. It's a crusher. It tastes barely of anything. Sweet corn, a little bit of hop bitterness. But trying to think what else I've been drinking lately. I think my favorite cheap beer is Miller Lite. Miller Lite is it's a good beer. It's a really good beer. Who's waving? Is that a kid?
Dick's waving. What you need, Dick? Is that your kid?
Hey, kid.
Oh yeah, that's his daughter. It's all good.
Well, hey, daughter.
He's got some good kids. He's giving them ice cream.
I want ice cream too. Yeah, so I love Miller Lite. Miller Lite has beer flavor. It tastes like grain. It has grain. You can smell the hop a little bit, which is kind of funny because it's extract. But it tastes like a little bit of caramel malt, little tiny bit of caramel malt, and it tastes like grain. Whereas I think Bud Light tastes like green apples to me, and licorice. Like if you have I'm not sure what you call them in your area, but like a red licorice, or around here they call them red vines in Pittsburgh because we're crazy. But drink a Bud Light, bite like a red licorice, and tell me not the same flavor compounds. Look at that cutie with the red hair. I love your hair, honey. Hi, can you wave? Hi. Hi, redhead. All right. So yeah, I think Miller Lite it's like a. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Talk about Miller Lite, man, and then we'll talk about.
Miller Lite tastes to me like someone took a Pilsner. Yeah, Miller Lite to me tastes like someone took a Pilsner or a Helles and diluted it down a little bit with seltzer water. That's what it tastes like to me, which is fine and dandy when you're on the water in a canoe, or if you're fishing, or if you're playing cornhole, right? So yeah, those are probably my favorites: Miller Lite, Hams, Iron City, which is local, Genesee Cream Ale. I drink a lot of that. Yeah, I get some nods back there, approval. Yeah.
I live in Texas, and there's nothing wrong with a good old Miller Lite on a hot 100-degree day or a good Lone Star. It's all good to me. So,
yeah.
So,
yep.
Will, who had the beautiful redheaded daughter, asked if you could turn yourself into a pizza, what kind of pizza would it be?
Oh, I'm a pizza fanatic, man. Me and my family make pizza a lot. It's trying because I'm trying to stay under 180 pounds. I'm only 5'9", so I'm not a real tall dude. So to me, 5 pounds shows up, and pizza is an easy way to add 5 pounds. So we do everything ourselves. We make our own dough, our own sauce, do a lot of cheese combinations. My favorite pizza that I made was something I formulated for my wife, and it was our standard, Neapolitan dough, goat cheese, arugula, balsamic reduction, and then on top of it is reduced mushrooms and onions, like red onions. And it's not a lot of toppings. It's like just enough so that maybe every few bites you get a piece. So it's not like America where every bite has to have a pepperoni in it. The arugula goes on right at the end. It kind of wilts a little bit. Every couple bites, you get that sting of that balsamic vinegar. You get a sting of that cheese, and then it contrasts really well with the pepperiness of the arugula. So that's my show-off pizza if I'm going to show off.
Dude, you had me at caramelized red onions, like any kind of onion on a pizza.
Yeah.
And some arugula, that sounds badass to me.
I am really a fan of these wilted salads lately. I've been making a lot of them. So you take like one or two toppings, and you saute it, and then you have your greens, and then you just drizzle this warm, the liquid from the saute and these slightly tenderized vegetables right on top of the salad. It's just amazing. It's just, it's like a game changer. And you can have someone over for like barbecue or steaks or something like that, and they will talk about that wilted salad. It's crazy. And it's a perfect opportunity if you have like garden, if you have some herbs and stuff. You take a couple of those herbs, you throw it into your saute liquid with your oil and your acid, whatever that is, a wine or your acid could be vinegar or whatever, but you have your acid and sometimes a juice. So you can just squeeze a lemon in there or squeeze like a pomelo or grapefruit, get some acid in there. And that sauce is now a perfect flavor extraction for an herb. So you just take some thyme or rosemary, put it in there, you drizzle it on top of the salad. People will talk about the salad. It's crazy.
Apparently I need to make more wilted salads is what I just learned.
Yeah,
we're right up on an hour. I want to be honoring of your time. I don't want to keep you. I know you got stuff going on tonight.
Well, my
I
wife's
do wanna ask you
out,
what
so you can cut me. I'm fine with that. But if people have nerd questions they want to send me, go ahead. My wife went down the road, so I'll give you another
Sweet.
15,
No.
20 minutes.
That's perfect. What would be your desert island beer? If you could take one beer on a desert island with you, what would it be?
Oh, that's tough, man. That was funny enough. That was a Miller Coors interview question. It really changes. I mean, you can't go wrong Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. It's just good. It's just balanced. I used to be a big Tank 7 fan from Boulevard. And Pilsner, tank beer, unpasteurized, unfiltered Pilsner Urquell. Tough to beat that. So I think
Good. So
I
the
think if I
best
went to a
answer
desert
I've ever
island, I
heard
had
to that,
so if I went to a desert island, I had
Schlerza
either.
said
Go ahead.
Orval.
Say again.
Danny Schlerza said Orval. So
Or-
Vinny
oh, yeah.
Schlerz's answer was Orval because it would
Yeah.
change the entire time you were there.
Orval is definitely up there. So I think one of the questions I was given at a job interview was like, if you could fill out 7 taps, what would they be? So if you have your dream spot location, you're doing you're not a brewery, you're a tap room. What would I think it was 7, might have been 5 beers, whatever. So the first question I asked was, is this for me or is it for commercial viability? Because commercial viability is different than for me. So to me, Orval would be on there for sure. That is one of the most beautiful beers in the world. I just did a Brett bottle conditioned farmhouse ale with a local home brewer. Her name is Zach, and I called the beer Zachary. It's not as good as Orval because that would be stupid to say, but it is in that zone. It has like that like funky pineapple with a little bit of caramel malt and just super bone dry. And I love it. It's one of my favorite beers I've ever made, I think.
Send me a bottle. I want to try it.
I can do that. Text me later. I
Perfect.
have a lot of it, and it's a funky saison, so it's not exactly burning the doors down. People aren't lined up outside for it. So
yeah, we can arrange a beer swap. That sounds really good. Yeah. So Miller Coors. So the other Will wants to know, like, what was kind of that process, the Miller Coors interview process? What are some other fun interview questions that you've gotten?
So that was an awesome job. I got really sad when they were starting to dissolve that team because it showed a shift to me. I think Miller, the way it differentiated itself from, AB and a couple other brands, was that it showed that it really cared about beer nerdism, about beer quality, about speaking the language. So we had a team that was all about innovation, and our job was to teach marketing and our sales force and, just everyone in the company, up top to bottom. We had these classes that was called Beer Merchant or Beer Champion, depending on, they changed over a couple of years. But they wanted you to be able to talk to brewers and talk to a woman who was buying a beer and asking the prototypical questions. Like, you want to teach a staff to be able to talk to a woman who thinks she only likes fruity beers because all she's ever been offered, right? The sexism. So a woman goes to a bar and someone offers her a Leinenkugel because she's a woman. So we were trying to sit there and say, hey, this is a huge 50% of the population is female. Why are we trying to shoehorn them? That's ridiculous. And it's because of selective marketing that we've always done. It's lazy marketing. So instead, you sit there and ask a person what they like, what do they enjoy, and then you try to steer them towards a beer that would fit that need. So we did a lot of market training, a lot of sales force training. And then we also talked with the innovation team about making a beer that would fit the market. Unfortunately, because it's a corporation, a lot of times, you have this beautiful, sports car in mind, and out the other end comes a Yugo, because that's how corporations work. And a lot of the things that they would do would get distilled in the process of corporatization, in which, you're trying to make this. We used to make these beers called Deep Eddies or Big Eddies, and they were these unctuous stouts, and it was part of the Leinenkugel's platform. Well, it died because the customer who was going to go buy Leinenkugel was the Shandy customer. So when they were making a big flavorful stout, people did not accept it. There was a education expectation gap that had to be filled. So we were trying to fill that gap, but it was easier just to abandon it, you know, because they had turned at that point a Line and Kugel into a Shandy brand, which just really bothered me. But so what they decided to do is start doing those things with their other craft brands. So, you know, Terrapin had Wake and Bake. So customers accepted Wake and Bake from Terrapin. They did not accept a big stout from Line and Kugel because of bias, right? So I think the main thing I took away from Miller Coors was how to talk the language of selling, how to sell beer, how marketing works. I didn't always agree with it, but these people were not dumb. You know, they were hiring people from like, you know, Frito-Lay, you know, American Foods. They were hiring people from Pepsi and Coke, from Google. You know, they had some of the best marketing minds in the world, you know, and I just learned an immense amount about brand positioning, consistency of messaging, delivering on expectation, not pigeonholing yourself because we had done it at Miller Coors, how not to destroy a brand like Budweiser did with Shock Top. You know, it's stuff like that I learned. But you asked about interview questions. One of my favorite interview questions was, I'm sitting across from, you know, two Master Cicerones because our team was mostly Master Cicerones and a few advanced. So this one guy, Jason Pratt, asked me, tell me about how diacetyl is formed. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. That sounds fun. And he goes, start with precursors. I was like, okay. I was like, do you want me to talk about like valine or isoleucine? And he smiled. He goes, yes. So I went through that and went through the pathway as best I could. And I knew who I was talking to, so I could not bullshit this man. He was like a master's degree chemist, and he worked in the lab at Miller Coors. So I did the best I can. I gave that caveat saying like, hey, I'm going to say some things wrong here. I'm going off of memory. He's like, fine. And then he turned around. I wasn't even finished my answer. He goes, same question, but now you're explaining it to a server at Buffalo Wild Wings. So that's what you needed to do at my job, was be able to talk to a brewer, talk to a lab technician about the technical side, but you had to be able to flip the switch and give a presentation to 50 people who worked for Applebee's, you know, and hold their attention. So I had to be able to sit there and talk about the asshole and make it light and make it fun. Talk about like, who wants butter in their beer? You know, we used to call it being a beer clown. You know, you have to be a beer clown, but a professional beer clown, you know. So that was one of my favorite questions.
Deal with the customers so the engineers don't have to. You're a people person.
Yeah. I'm a people person. Why can't you see that? Yeah, and it was funny for me because I can be very curt and I can be very to the point. I'm an engineering mind, but you know, I like to joke and I like to have a good time. I like to educate, and I didn't realize how much I liked adult education until I was in that job. It's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So you talked a little bit about your own project. Are you at liberty to chat about that? Or you?
Yeah, I'm just looking for a space. Yeah, I'm thinking about maybe doing a fermentation space, but one of the partners wants us to just buy a brew house. It's easy to say, oh, what's an extra $250,000, you know? But to me, there's so many brew houses around these cities that are idle 2 or 3 days a week. So I would like to do a fermentation project. It's been done other places, so it's not like it's a new idea. But I want to concentrate on lower volume beers and just make it more of like an experience. So a lot of farmhouses, bottle conditioned stuff. So it's elevated, but it'll be a small space to not have to worry about that overhead. I don't need to sell, 20 barrels a week of hazy if I have a small space. I'd probably stay on at Hop Farm and 412, and this would just be a passion project. Some of my investors, potential investors, because we're on the chit chat phase, they want to go bigger. They want to do a typical brewery. So one of the things I'm talking about is maybe melding the two. I'm okay with doing some hazies and sours, but I don't want to be doing what everyone else is doing. And that's like almost one bag of puree, which is like 45, 44 pounds per barrel. Some of these places making 10 and 20 barrel batches are adding 10 and 20 boxes of puree. It's not even beer. It's 50% sugar from the fruit. It's still a beverage, It's still delicious, you know, if you like baby food, but it's not beer, but it's a beverage. It's an adult beverage, right? It's a low alcohol beer daiquiri, which is a thing, and that's cool. But I would like to do it more refined, like, you know, bring it back a little bit, start hovering around like the, you know, 4 or 5 bags of fruit per 10 barrels, which still is insane, but make it like fruit flavored beer, and more classics. But I think a lot of brewers, people like us, we say we want to do that, and then you realize that you're not making money. So I am not afraid. If we do a bigger project, I'm not afraid of doing some more refined hazies, so not super sweet hazies. Maybe letting them age. I think hazies need to cold condition longer than most people do. A lot of places I go to, especially on their new releases, their cans or their tap, they have a lot of hop burn, like a lot. And I think I don't think it's palatable. I think it causes palate fatigue. And I'm into cold aging hazies a little more. You don't get that thick milkshakey hazy. It's kind of in between. But that's what I like. That's why I want you to be able to drink 4 of them. You know, so we'll see. But I'm a foodie. So the place that I want to open should be have food first. So we're looking at kitchen spaces. And I want to do some simple pies and, you know, wilted salads. And, you know, I don't want it to be too bougie because that turns off and now you're at a select crowd. But I think you can do like elevated pub fare. So it's just like a, you know, typical pub fare with a twist. You know, who says you can't have a pickled beet on a hamburger? You know, stuff like that.
Well, and I noticed like a lot of breweries like that don't have food. Like some of them have food, and if the food's really good, you'll go there just for the food, even if the beer's mediocre, right?
Right.
Looking for a place to hang out, but
Yeah.
But like food, it's what keeps people hanging out, ordering more beers. So
Yeah, I found like right now, a lot of places that are a combo that they have food and beer. You know, a lot of times their food is anywhere from 30 to 60% of the revenue. So tickets are, you know, cashier till numbers at the end of the week, end of the month. You know, at Hop Farm, we hover around 30%. You know, but we are a brewery with a kitchen. There's a local place named Cinderlands. I wouldn't be surprised, and I don't know their numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're over 50% food. You know, there's another brewery in town, which is very food centric, and they're like 60%, 70% food sales. You know, and
that's awesome, though. I mean, at least they're going on something.
yeah, there's one in kind of a bougie neighborhood, like an old money neighborhood. You know, so it's an older demographic, like, you know, 45 to, you know, 65. And it's a restaurant first, I think. It's a restaurant with a brewery in it, and they hover around 60% sales of food. And their beer is decent, but they don't distribute. You know, very, very limited, if any distribution at all. I don't recall seeing them out. So basically, instead of buying beer, they're making their own beer, and their food is their seller. And they have multi-million-dollar revenue. So they're not pikers. You know, they're not amateurs. They're making real money, and it's mostly food. You know, so I'd like to have a small kitchen.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you're gonna have a cold IPA centric brewery with a kitchen, right?
I just made a cold IPA with one of the best brewers in the city. His name is Steve Sloan. He owned a place called Roundabout, and we made a cold IPA. We used 3470, you know, Weihenstephan yeast. We fermented it cold, and it was dry hopped and biotrans hopped, the fermentation hopped with Rakau and New Zealand Cascade. It's called Tahiki. It's one of the best beers I've ever made. That and that Zachary. So my 2 best beers have been collabs. It was just amazing. It was the first beer I made professionally that I thought would stand up against some of the best professional brewers I had brewed with and mentored under. So once again, I'll never claim it was as good as a Fatheads beer because that's ignorant. But it was the first time where I tasted it and I was like, this has hop flavor and aroma. this carries hops through the entire palate, which is what you get from a good Fatheads beer. I was just really proud of it, and I was glad I did it with this guy who I considered a mentor as well in the industry, because I didn't want to do a collab with him and disappoint him, because he's so good. So that was a cold IPA. But I think if you gave it to most people and just said, "What is this?" they would say it was an IPA, West Coast. I'm not sure what the cold IPA thing was.
You use 3470. That was
Yeah,
the cold IPA
but if you,
part of it. Is
I don't do
3470.
the untapped thing very much because I want to stay sane. But if you look, if you Google, like, it's called Little Ditty, like Little Ditty about Jack and Diane, the song, Little Ditty Hop Farm, you'll see the beer. It's like brilliantly crystal clear. It tastes like, tangerine and passion fruit. It's amazing. Give me a nerd question.
So, packaging. What's your packaging process for competitions? And then do you have a packaging line at Hop Farm? And
We talking homebrew?
how can we start homebrew and then talk commercial?
So for homebrew, I was very, very big into purging my kegs really well. So I used to add a little bit of, and I think my rates and my numbers are probably in some Brülosophy articles. Not only in mine that I wrote, I think Matt, pretty much Matt what it was, but I think they had shared my numbers. But I would use metabisulfate in water. So you have a sulfated water solution in my keg, fill it up, and then I would purge it with either CO2 or residual fermentation CO2. So it's purged. And that pushes the water out and it leaves behind just the CO2, right? So theoretically, you have a inert environment. It's not gonna be 100%, never is. But the combination of doing the solid water, because water is non-compressible, and it's sulfated, metabisulfate. I think I mostly use sodium metabisulfate water. And I think I only tried to get to like 8 or 10 ppm, so not like a high amount. So we're talking just like it was a couple tenths of a gram in 5 gallons. Like I said, I think the numbers are on Brülosophy somewhere. If you can't find them, someone ask me, and I'll try to look them up for you. But sulfated water, push that out, and then I would do a pressurized transfer from my fermentation vessel into my keg. So potentially close to 0 oxygen pickup on transfer, theoretically. Then when I went to the bottle, I would bottle condition if it made sense to do so. I would use CBC1, which is a bottle conditioning yeast, and it's sticky. So it falls out of solution real quick. It doesn't kick a lot of sulfur. It doesn't kick up a full-on fermentation and give you diacetyl and acetaldehyde. So I would add a little tiny bit of yeast in my package and then bottle condition with it. Now, I might not do that if it's like a crystal clear lager, right? Because you don't know how the judge is going to handle. But if it's a beer that can handle a little bit of haze, or if you get a little bit experience with it, that CBC is so sticky. It's very much like what you see on Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. That little tiny dusting in the ridge of the bottle. I think it helps preserve the beer. I think it helps preclude oxygen. If you don't want to go that route, I don't blame you. I would do a semi-pressurized evacuation of my bottles. So I would use a beer gun with a stopper, and you can either peel back the stopper with your thumb, or actually I would use a sports ball pin, and I would drill a tiny hole, put the sports pin, the inflator needle, through the hole, cover it with my thumb, use the beer gun, purge it till it got pressurized. You can feel it start to kick your thumb off or kick the stopper off. And I would just let my thumb up a little bit, let it sit. And I would purge much longer than I had to. And then I'd go sniff the needle hole. And if it like burned your nose, I'd go, okay, that's good. I started doing some experiments with that guy, Steve Sloan, with his Orbisphere. And I got a number down. I forget what it was, 30 seconds would get me near 0 ppb, parts per billion. So I would just purge the living hell out of my bottles, and then I would go right to beer, you know, and I would go up to the top. So I would leave maybe this much room in the top of the bottle, not the whole half neck like you see typically. I would go a little closer, and it's best if you have someone who can immediately cap for you, you know, or yourself. It's slower and messier if you're doing it yourself. So I would come out, and as I came out, I would start squirting the CO2 on top of it. So you have CO2 on that top space. It's like, so as I'm pulling out, right at the end, when I'm trying to get the beer level right close to the top, my beer gun's almost all the way out, and I'm starting to spray a little bit of CO2, and you can see it kind of flutter the top of the beer, and then boom, I'd cap it. If you want to go really pro, is you would put the cap on, you'd whack it with a spoon or a wrench or whatever, and it would push a little bit of gas out, and then you cap on foam. And that's what Fatheads does for competitions. They would agitate the bottle. You know, you will occasionally break one, you know, but you give it a good wrap, it'll evac that space. I have won a competition with a 6-month-old American Pale Ale, you know, in competitions. So that either mean my Pale Ale was good or the rest of the competition was bad. I don't know, but some combination thereof. But I have won with, you know, half a year old IPAs and Pale Ales. If you
Well, judges obviously had a shitty palate, right? So
exactly.
That's
Professionally,
awesome.
professionally, it's so complicated, man. I mean, if you're not measuring with a meter into the ppb range, it's all guesswork. So you have to get either a C box from Anti-Ampar, an Orbisphere from Hawk, or a Gehaltometer from Pentair Hoffman's, right? You need these pieces of equipment, and they're between $15,000 and $35,000, right? And most breweries decide to buy another tank instead of an oxygen meter. But when you're messing with things like the purge duration, the purge pressure, when you're messing with your foam over, your cap on foam, and when you're messing with your seamer, everything is blind until you're measuring. So you make a tweak, and you change your purge duration or your purge pressure, and you think, oh, that looks better. And then counterintuitive, you've actually increased your oxygen pickup, because what happened is you sprayed too hard with your CO2. And instead of it doing a quiescent fill of CO2 and purging that space out, so like, you know, you're trying to do CO2 and it has a little wand and it goes in there and it has like the gas misting up. If you go too fast, you instead create a vortex and it pulls oxygen in. It's counterintuitive. The other thing too is on a lot of these canning machines, they have these lid flappers. And right before the lid comes on, so it comes through, it picks up the lid and smashes down, it has a little spurt of CO2. A little spurt is nice. It might kick up the foam and help the foam come up and kick over, so you're capping on foam. Too much oxygen, if you know anything about engineering principles, is you have this spray of CO2 that comes across this lid. Well, guess what happens when you spray across something? Who has ever used one of those weed and feeders? You know, where you hook up to a hose and it sprays, it pulls either this way or pulls this way. So that burst, that little spurt of CO2 comes across and it drags oxygen into it and goes right into your beer. And I've found people will increase their purge thinking more is better because we're Americans. So we're like, oh my God, dial this fucker to 11. Well, you created a vortex or a Venturi effect, pardon me. You created a Venturi effect and you've pulled air into your vessel. Same thing with, you know, beer gun. You're sitting with a home brewer and you're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to spray the fucking hell out of this thing. You know, if you do it long enough, yes, you will evacuate. But I've found like on big tanks in breweries, if you're not doing the fill it with water and purge it out method, if you go gentle, fill it with CO2, pressurize it, and then blow it down real hard, and then do it a couple more times, it's a better evac. So you can try it with home brewing. You know, I'm not sure how you guys purge your kegs, your cornings, or whatever you're using, but I like to, you know, pressurize it to like, 5 pounds or whatever, then slowly bleed it down, pressurize it to 5 pounds, let it sit for a little bit, hoping for some stratification. It doesn't happen like instantly for what it's worth, because you have like these currents and stuff. So yeah, you fill it again with CO2, wait a little bit, and then blow it down. Do it a couple more times, but you get a more complete purge filling and blowing down than you do doing a continuous trickle.
Right, because you're waiting for the oxygen to kind of rise to the top of that CO2, right?
It does two things. One, yes, you get some stratification separation. So you hopefully you're preferentially removing this little cap of oxygen right here, right? Up in the top. But the other thing is if you're always feeding, maybe in the bottom, you're feeding CO2 up, at 5, 10, 15 pounds, and you're purging out maybe through a valve. This is the same thing as for a corny keg. You have a little purge right here. So for a corny keg, you go in the poppet, the wand comes down, the CO2 is going like this. Well, it's coming like this and it's swirling. You have currents. So if you're continuously doing that and you're bleeding out here, yes, eventually you'll evacuate the space. But if you fill it, you evacuate the entire space, you've already diluted this to a much higher degree in one shot than you will continuously doing a bleed and feed. The bleed and feed takes on average 5 to 7 times longer than a 3-time dump. So fill, pressurized dump, fill, pressurized dump. That principle was driven into us in the nuke industry because if you have a tube rupture in your steam generator, you have hot side water comes in these tubes, and now your steam generator is contaminated. Well, one of the methods is fill and dump, and the other one is a feed and bleed. Well, we have found, through practice that it takes, 5 to 7 times longer to feed and bleed than it does to fill and dump. You get a more complete evacuation because you had some CO2. Let's just say your first fill and dump is 30% oxygen, 70% CO2. You evacuate it and then you fill it back up with CO2. But if you're sitting there continuously bleeding, you're like at 70%, 65%. You're only slowly diluting it. It takes much, much more CO2 to do a feed and bleed than it does complete volume exchanges.
So on the pro level, when do you guys test for dissolved oxygen?
Immediately after canning. As soon as it's sealed, you have to test now because that oxygen will start reacting with the beer. So if you have theoretically 50 ppb of oxygen in your can, now obviously it's retarded with temperature, right? Everything happens more slowly with temperature. So that's Arrhenius's law, Arrhenius's rule. Most reactions happen 3 to 5 times slower for every 10 degrees Celsius decrease in temperature. So if you take a beer that's cold, off the package, it's probably gonna be like 37 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 degrees Fahrenheit. And you take it and you have some amount of oxygen, some known amount of oxygen in that container. You have to measure it now. Because if you take it instead of the side and go, oh, we'll give that to the lab in a half hour, well, that beer is consuming that oxygen. So what's really 50, 60 ppb is probably going to end up being 30 ppb. And now you're patting yourselves on the shoulders going, oh my God, we're 30 ppb. We're amazing. So I've gone to these breweries, for consulting or whatever, or as a friend. And they're like, oh yeah, we're doing like, 30 ppb with our packaging line. I'm like, ooh, cool. And then I see the cans over there, like labeled for sample. I go, no, you're not. You were probably around 50, 60, 70 ppb. By the time you test it, it's 30 ppb. Oxygen is one of the most reactive substances in that we know about. That and pure sodium.
On the metabol sulfite, Alex brought this up. When you do it in advance with your water, does the sulfate solution continue to scrub O2 days later, or is it kind of like you put it in there and it's one and done, or it reacts all pretty fast?
I don't remember the exact ratio of how much free sulfate. It'd be free sulfur at this point, but when the sulfate converts to sulfur and it consumes oxygen, there's a certain molar interaction ratio, right? And I just don't have it off the top of my head right now. But once it does that, it's done, right? It's like this many moles of free sulfur will consume this much oxygen, and then you're done. Now, if it brings it to zero, so if you have enough sulfur, free sulfur from the sulfate, metabisulfate, if you have enough free sulfur to consume all the oxygen in that water and in that headspace, then it's over. There's no more oxygen. Now, if you have any ingress, you have leaky gasket. As soon as you bring the beer in, right, the beer is going to have some. If you test the bright tank, even at professional breweries, and especially at home breweries, it's not zero. It's going to be like, often between 8 and 20 ppb of oxygen in your fermentation vessel. You're like, that doesn't sound right. It was blowing off CO2 for like days. There's some level, unless you have like a high sulfur yeast, like a lager yeast, there's some level of oxygen in there. So when you bring that 8 ppb beer into your keg, which is now sitting at 20, 30 ppb, you have now 28 or 30 ppb in your beer. So the idea is to get both as low as possible. So good fermentation practices, good transfer practices from your fermenter into your keg. If you've evacuated your keg with enough free sulfur to consume all the oxygen in the keg, but you've now purged that keg with CO2, which for what it's worth is not pure, right? It's 99.9 or 99 if you use 5 nines gas, which is 99.999. There's some oxygen in there. So the idea is that you have a little bit of this water, on the outside of your keg, and it's in the inside, but on the outside walls, you have a little bit of that water with some free sulfur available. So when you bring your beer in from your fermenter, hopefully it consumes that 8 to 10, whatever you got in your fermenter ppb, but it's almost never zero. I've gone into a bright tank with like 17 ppb of oxygen. That's after hours of a purge, but that's much better than it would have been had I not done hours of purge. So you accept some minimal amount of damage. So when you're kegging as a home brewer, your idea is to get the vessel to zero or close to zero. And the only way you can really test that is with a meter. So in practice, in just like anecdotal evidence, I've found if I make like a 8 to 10 ppb solution of water, it tends to lead to a beer that's very shelf stable with not having so much sulfur that I taste it. Because if you go too much, I'm not sure what that magic number is. It's going to depend on the beer. It's going to depend on your sensitivity, et cetera, et cetera. If you bring your keg down to near zero with 8 to 12 ppb metabisulfate, the 8 to 10 ppb is the sulfate, not the whole entire chemical, right? You're trying to dose this for 8 to 10 ppb of sulfate. That space is near zero. You bring your beer in, I don't tend to be able to pick it up. I'm not saying all of a sudden at 15 ppb you're going to be able to taste sulfur, but once you start getting into the 20 to 30 ppb of sulfate, I think you start to smell the eggy sulfurness. So that's me. I'm not sure what you are, but that's probably going to go away, right? Because what's going to happen is you're going to have some free sulfur. You bring your beer in, which is going to have 8 to 10 up to 20 ppb from the fermenter. Your sulfur is now going to consume that if there's any residual left. Or over time, as this beer begins to oxidize, so it's going to be oxidizing, but the sulfur is going to protect it. So if you overdose, you bring your beer into your keg and you're like, oh my God, I can smell sulfur now. Wait a day or two, it'd probably go away. It's going to react with the beer. But sometimes I've seen it get so bad. Who here hasn't made a sulfur laden lager or notoriously a saison or a wit beer? Wit beer isn't bad for it. Wit beer yeast and some Hefeweizen yeast kick a lot of sulfur. So usually you're okay racking those into a not as well purged vessel because that sulfur from that fermentation will consume that oxygen. So a lot of it just happens to know your
I have a shitty palate.
Do you?
Of course I have a shitty palate.
Well, a lot of people
I
think
don't
so. I mean, some people have it and they don't know it, and it's better to just be able to say, "I do have a shitty palate,"
I just gotta lead in with I have a shitty palate. So if you want me to taste them, so I have a shitty palate and I got allergies, so whatever.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it without being able to test is guessing. And you can purge a keg. You can test your water with like an over-the-counter West hop aroma. So I like the three things you got going on there. You know, the slight toffee bready from the British malts, the slight earthy mushroomy soil flavor. I like doing really, really well, and that's drier. And then I volunteered to do a homebrew collab for one of the winners of the session beer categories. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, the person who won with a mild. So I wasn't going to not honor the collab. So we brewed his, but his was luckily a bit bigger, a bit chewier, a bit more cocoa chocolate. Mine's more dry and brown malt, you know. So mine's kind of, you know, what a mild is going to be like. What are you talking about? What decade are you talking about here? You know, of the beer's history. So mine's more what I think you might find on Shut Up About Barclay Perkins, more brown malt forward, more dry. And then later on, when the beers became sweeter, and then they came back around to dry again for what it's worth. But that middle pocket, when you have a home brewer competition, a lot of home brewers tend to, I think, brew in that like 4 to 5%, 4.5% mild, but their finishing gravity is like 4 Plato or 1016, 1.016. Whereas I like to be down like 2.75 Plato are like around 1010. They're different, and
Right.
So.
Well, and then you just call one an English pub ale, so it doesn't look like you have the same beer on tap twice.
Yeah. Old world mild versus new world mild.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Or
Cool.
middle worlds. You call it the Middle Earth mild.
Sure.
There you go.
All right, gentlemen, it was a pleasure.
Thanks so much, sir. We appreciate you.
All
Hopefully you
right.
have all your pumpkin spice beers ready to be tapped any day now.
I think I'm gonna make a pumpkin mole beer.
That actually sounds pretty rad. I'm intrigued.
All right, man. Cheers.
Really
Hey, thanks for having me on. Always nice to talk to homebrewers. Always nice to talk to the old Brülosophy crew and supporters. So keep it up. I'm really amazed what the Brew Club has become. So this is awesome, guys. I feel honored to talk at your faces.
Well, man, anytime you want to come on, anytime you want to come hang out, you're always welcome, brother. We really appreciate everything you've done with Brülosophy and all the way going into now. And so we're just thankful to have you here tonight and be able to talk anything from pizza to salads to crazy ass beers. So it's awesome.
Right on. That was fun. I like the fact that we got to talk about some food. So cool. All right, gentlemen. See you later.
Later, man.